Our next speaker is Elsie Dubray. She's the Community Research Associate at the American Indian Cultural Center in San Francisco and Tribal Food Systems Fellow at First Nations Development Institute. The title of her talk today is Following the Buffalo Towards the Future We Deserve. So thank you, sister, for coming. Good to see you. It's all yours.
Thank you. All right, I'll just go ahead and start by introducing myself. Hamadak yapi chantewashtea na pechiuza peksto machpia ilewi machiapi na washitu yami chajekin Elsie Dubray na Oohenunpa Lakxota na Nueta na Hidatsa hemacha na wakpawashte oyanke hemataha. Hello, my relatives. I greet you all with good heart. My name is Machpia Ilewi, and my English name is Elsie Dubray. I am Tuketa Lakota, Mandan, and Hidatsa, and I come from the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. Currently, I'm living in San Francisco. Been there for about a year after I graduated with my master's last summer. And I'm currently working as the Community Research Associate for the American Indian Cultural Center in San Francisco, and working on an exciting fellowship project, finally, long time coming, from First Nations Development Institute. And I'm just really honored to be here on this stage again. I love this conference. We've heard from some really excellent speakers the past few days or day and a half or whatever it's been. And as I've titled this presentation, I'm really honored and excited to be able to share some of my thoughts and hopes and dreams surrounding the future. And I say the future we deserve because I'm insistent upon the fact that as we think about the future that we're actively building for our descendants and our future generations, that we must continue to challenge our leaders, our communities, and ourselves not to accept the bare minimum, not to accept the status quo under the systems that were not built by or for us. I believe that we deserve the very best that we can imagine, not because I'm young and naive or an unrealistic dreamer, but because of the life that I've lived. Being able to have been raised amongst and around the buffalo, my lived experiences with them, and all of that really fills me with this radical hope in all that the buffalo have to offer, our communities, our stories, and all of the ways that our ways of life have to offer. And that, and I probably am still a little bit naive, and I am still kind of young, but I'm also not afraid to imagine, and I feel like I have a pretty solid grip on how important it is to imagine and to dream in the actual building of this quote-unquote realistic future. I think the first time that I spoke here I was just about to start my second year at Stanford University, and even though I've sat on a couple panels at this conference since then, and I've been on the planning committee, it feels a bit surreal to be returning here, having graduated and being 25 now with 2 degrees, and I'm just really grateful and proud of all of that, but I think I'm most proud of the ways I've been able to think and grow as I've emerged outside of the shackles of Western academia. It's funny because I think when I was 18, was the first time that I was here, and I talked about some of my hopes and dreams, and they were probably perceived as being maybe a little bit wild or naive. And here I am 7 years later, 25, having gone to school 2 degrees later, and I think my dreams are even wilder. But I think that's because of the buffalo. And my really good friend Derek, who did a chef expo just yesterday, he talked about how we take on the characteristics of the food that we consume. And it's important to remember that. And I've been eating wild grass-fed buffalo for a quarter of a century now, so I don't think anybody should be surprised by the contents of my dreams. And okay, I'm gonna introduce myself a little bit more, and some of my experience, and offer some food for thought. But I think I want to cover a little bit of the historical context that I know I've already presented on before if you've seen me talk, but I think it's really important to center and ground in just how important buffalo are to Lakota culture, to try to convey the magnitude of that significance and how important they are to us and how sacred they are to us and everything that they mean to us through any sort of presentation or trying to talk about it without bearing witness to them and seeing them and knowing these things. It's impossible to articulate, especially in English. Our creation stories, many different iterations of our creation stories tell of the Pteoyate emerging from the Black Hills, from Wind Cave, and becoming the Lakxota on the surface of Grandmother Earth. And so given their role in our creation story and our understandings of life, they naturally have a very significant and central holistic role in our lives and in our culture. From the way they nourish our bodies to their lessons of generosity and respect and reciprocity, to the way they mother their young, the way they care for the land, increasing biodiversity, adding to soil health. Anything that you can imagine, the Pateo Yate have been central to Lakota culture since the very moment of our existence. And it was in grim recognition of that truth that the U.S. settler colonial government set out on a genocidal campaign to try to eradicate the buffalo. We've been over this in many different slides from many different presenters. But we have General Sheridan here talking about killing, skinning, and selling until the buffaloes were exterminated. And that was very intentionally to settle the vexed Indian question. The catastrophic effects, though, of displacing buffalo from the hearts and minds of Lakota people is so much more than just starvation. And it has had such a deeply resounding, nuanced impact on our communities, severing, even though not entirely our relationship to the buffalo, has distanced many of our people from our traditions, our ceremonies, our songs, the values and the lessons that the buffalo have always taught us, and the abundance of holistic health that they have always gifted us. We've been distanced from our personal connections to them, leaving an absence in our understandings of kinship, our understanding of the world, and our understanding of ourselves. And these have really deep consequences, and the historical trauma of that reverberates today and manifests in a lot of the health crises and statistics that so many people outside of our communities are willing to accept about my people. But I really like to reject any sort of victim narrative that makes it seem like that's the end of our story. And I refuse to accept this fate of poor health and dysfunction and a destroyed food system. My understanding of what the buffalo mean to us as Lakota people and all that they hold for our future and our ability to really thrive and combat those deficit narratives is what inspired my dad's work and then subsequently my own. And so I love that picture of my dad in the center. That's him there. He was born and raised on our Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota. Raised by his grandparents on the land that his family had always known. And he worked really hard to develop our tribe's buffalo herd, founded the Intertribal Bison Cooperative in the 90s, worked through that into the early 2000s, and then has worked on our personal family's herd, making the life that I have been able to live possible. And so for over 3 decades now, almost 4, he has been working directly with the buffalo, developing his relationship to them, working for our tribe and others. And since I was a little girl then, I got to hear the rich and profound stories of the buffalo through my dad's eyes. Lessons of his life and his experiences with the buffalo, stories of admiration, of lessons of respect, stories of being chased, of being trampled, stories of awe, of spirit, of our culture, of hope. And it truly is the greatest honor of my life to be my father's daughter. I say that all the time and I mean it. My parents met because of this work brought together by the buffalo, and somewhere along the line, bringing my late brother and I into the mix. And I'm so privileged and blessed to have been born into a life and to live a life having been surrounded by the buffalo, and having them as some of my greatest teachers and having access to my ancestral food. So because of this, eventually it wasn't just stories that I was hearing. I was getting to live out some of these things for myself and experience some of these things for myself, and I'm eternally grateful. But growing up here, though, I also grew up amongst the other realities of life on our reservation: the poverty, the alcoholism, violence, substance use, unemployment, suicide, hopelessness statistics, all that we're all particularly familiar with. And this is my little brother, Bo. I lost him, my favorite person and my best friend in this life, to suicide almost 5 years ago now. It'll be 5 years in November. And countless other individuals in my community, in my family, in my schools. And I make mention of this, A, because it's Suicide Prevention Month, and B, like, I don't say all this to sensationalize the grief of my family or myself or my community, because I know you all know it all too well. I say it because the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it is part of my story, and it's all formative in the last 25 years of my life and has influenced my particular interests very heavily in food sovereignty, in buffalo restoration, in the reclamation of our holistic food systems, in public health, and it's really helped me navigate personal issues like my eating disorder in high school and early college, and how to grieve all of the death that I've become so accustomed to, and especially the death of my brother that really did break me entirely, and how to be angry and how to process the violence and the drinking and the drugs and the diabetes and the metabolic disease. And really importantly, the buffalo helped me remain hopeful despite it all. Auntie Rowan yesterday, she was talking about how she said something like she feels like the seeds, she didn't raise the seeds, those seeds raised her. And that really resonated with me, because I think beyond just the physical reality of my upbringing, being surrounded by these buffalo, in really grappling with this grief and reflecting on that really hard and continuously hard journey, I realized just how much the buffalo have been formative in my life, in who I am today as I stand here. And how much that they've witnessed and helped me grow from the little girl picking June berries and ice skating in her snow boots on the river to the young woman who is really learning how to love her life and cling to hope with everything she has despite the horrors of our world. Losing my brother, I like to say I adopted a no BS policy because something like that really wakes you up. It shakes you really hard and all of the BS falls away and all you can see is what really actually matters. The buffalo raising me, it gave me a framework that I think comes in contrast with some of the things that we think about in mainstream food system spaces and sometimes even in our own communities' efforts of food sovereignty. And so I'd like to kind of use grief as a concept to kind of talk through some of that a bit. So hopefully it makes some sense. But when they killed millions of buffalo and we got shoved onto these reservations and forced to eat rations, they created systemic food insecurity. This violent and traumatic act in the moment was then made into a system, and that system still functions today. So there's an ongoing and deeply painful traumatizing that continues to happen all the time for Native folks as we come up on those barriers of foodways access and we feel the violence of that system. And it's not just food insecurity looking like we have a hard time finding food in the winter. It's an actual intentional act of violence where we see oppressive policy keeping food and nutrition away from our people. And there's a lot of consequences to that. And there's also a grief component that I don't think we always mention. I can only imagine how painful it would be to see all of those buffalo killed. And we are grieving the loss of those buffalo, the loss of access to our homelands, the loss of access to those ways. So it's the pain and the violence of that moment, but it's also the loss, and it's grief. And I think we can call it that. And I see food insecurity as the birth of this deeply entrenched scarcity mindset that came out of survival, and it was necessary. But I think we have to recognize that and then approach it with compassion so that we can try to move past that and honor that we deserve more and refuse to settle. And I think acknowledging that grief component as part of the trauma gives us more reason to think about healing. And I think that the modern food sovereignty movement was born out of a strong will and desire to come back from this and to reclaim all of that knowledge and love and abundance that our ancestral food systems provide. But I worry that sometimes in our efforts to work with what we've got within the system that we exist under, that and we try to make an impact, which it should happen. It's necessary and it changes lives and it's really good work. And I would like to be abundantly clear that I am not criticizing anybody doing that work that I know we all benefit from, and I'm so grateful and that I applaud. I just worry that we sort of end the story there sometimes and start thinking that that's the extent of possibility. We run into a ceiling, and I think that we start to think that ceiling's real because it starts to feel pretty solid and it starts to feel pretty uncomfortable when you start pushing the limits of what the federal government decides is enough, or when we push the limits of what they are comfortable allowing us to be on their terms. And that's my hesitation even with the word sovereignty. I've had a lot of conversations with my dad and other people about this. Because obviously sovereignty is so relevant and important, like what is Elsie talking about right now? But at the end of the day, sovereignty is settler colonial legal terminology and language. And my tribe's buffalo herd buying a feedlot to finish our buffalo on corn and prioritizing buying a second off-reservation meat plant instead of a mobile slaughter unit, all of that counts as food sovereignty, quote unquote, under that definition. And so while I know most of us in this room have really beautiful and grounded and true aspirations when we say food sovereignty, I think it's important to consider that words have power. And when we use that language to talk about our food system, we're accepting a definition of a food system in the tongue of those who broke it. And we're inherently limited to what that looks like to their terms. And I know that when I'm talking about what I think buffalo restoration can be and all that they mean to us, I'm not asking for the permission of the USDA or the BIA or anyone really for that matter. Things like the USDA, in my opinion, and I'm sorry, I know there's probably USDA reps in here, and I know as individuals, like this is not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about the USDA, like as a big entity. And I know that there are plenty of people with really excellent intentions and grounded intentions, but the USDA is a politically violent sector of the US settler colonial government responsible for the near eradication of buffalo is never going to function to truly bring them back. They can throw dollars at tribes and at ranchers and look good on the outside, but requiring cross fences and incentivizing intensive management and individualism is not my idea of a reclaimed relationship to the buffalo. It's cattle washing our relationship to them for the sake of industry and for the sake of a dollar and for the sake of Uncle Sam, and I refuse to accept that because I don't think that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about reclaiming our health, when we're talking about reclaiming nutrition, when we're talking about reclaiming our food system. Thank you, thank you. I refuse to accept this because of what I've seen, because of what I've heard, because of our creation story, because of what I've felt. Cool Christy Peters is an Anishinaabe woman from up in Canada, and she writes about this in expressing her understanding of the significance of solidarity, indigenous solidarity with Palestine, but she talks about breaking open to become whole. And I think often about a moment shortly after I lost my little brother where I was entirely overwhelmed with grief. I was at home in my house, I was suffocating, and I needed to go outside, and I tried to go on a walk with my sweet dog Bella, and it still wasn't enough, and I went out and I went to go see our horses, and maybe they gave me the permission, but I broke down. I broke down and I sobbed on the land. I laid down in the grass and I just cried for a really long time. And I remember that vividly as the moment that I broke open, and it's taken me years now to process that was me becoming whole. In that moment, I was whole because I was able to let it all in. And I know that there is nowhere else in this world that would have given me the space and the grace to be able to do that. And it is because of my homelands and my relationship to them and the way I was able to relate to my homelands because of my life growing up with the buffalo that I was able to do that. I really believe that when those Juneberry bushes heard my sobs and the prairie grasses caught my tears, that they remembered the stories of my ancestors that are tied to mine. They knew that that loss of my brother was connected to that loss of those that they've remembered walking those lands for a really long time. I believe that they remembered my brother and the time he spent laughing and crying and playing in those same Juneberry thickets and on those same grasses, and that they missed him too. And I believe that these plants and these animals in our lands remember the atrocities that my people, the buffalo, the land, all of us have endured. And I think they made the same connections between that violence and my brother's suicide and all the premature deaths in my community, because the stories written into our bones are the same as the stories that are absorbed into their roots. And I think that these plants reconcile the same thoughts I do and pray that the buffalo come back too. And so it's that story for me and that experience for me is so formative. And Thomas King is a Cherokee author, and he writes that the truth about stories is that's all that we are. And I agree wholeheartedly. All of this in this picture or collage, I guess, that I've created, That's me. Our Lakxota creation stories. They tell me that that buffalo that I'm butchering right there, her story is mine. And when she gave her life, it wasn't just so I could eat. It was so that I could live. It was so that I could thrive. It was to nourish not just my body, but my spirit and my life. Just like when we first came out of the Black Hills. The stories my dad tells me about his time restoring buffalo on Cheyenne River and when things were really starting to change and just regular community folks were pulling over on the side of the road on their way home from work to just sit as a family and watch the buffalo and just learn from them and be around them. For the first time in decades, buffalo were an everyday part of people's lives. He talks about an elder coming into a council meeting to really humble some of our councilmen, and saying that it didn't matter to him what was going on or the certain politics of restoring these buffalo in tribal council meetings, but that those old people, those elders, our spiritual leaders in our community, they could hear the buffalo coming back and it was like music to their ears. And those are the types of things, like those stories, those experiences, they are the stories that are written into our bones, that are described by the stars and that have been told since our creation. The stories of the buffalo and the ways in which I've seen some of these things with my own eyes, and I've felt these things, and I've felt them laying on the land. They really show me the almost unmatched potential that buffalo have to heal when we honor them and we go about things in a good way. The buffalo have taught me who I am and what I can be and what I deserve as I've navigated my eating disorder, as I navigated the loss of my brother, the death in my community, the hardships of being a young person in today's world. And I've felt really blessed my whole life to know that one thing was certain, and that was the buffalo give me a sense of purpose in this life. And that while I don't know and still don't know and probably will never know what that looks like as far as a career or my personal future and what that's gonna look like, I know that the buffalo are going to be at the center of it, and I know and can trust and really mean it that I'm going to be okay. And I don't take that blessing lightly. And after all that they've been through to survive, it really shows me that I will too. The buffalo have given me the courage to heal, and they empower me to have hope. And this hope and this wholehearted belief in and faith in the buffalo is what enables me to think outside the box a little. And I think imagine a future in an otherwise world where buffalo are leaders with this ancestral wisdom in transcendence that can take us into a future that we really do deserve. And so what does that look like? I feel like I'm always talking all this like radical stuff, or people label it as radical. And then we don't talk about examples of what that could look like. Like what does this hope look like when it manifests? What does this otherwise world grounded in integrity and respect for the buffalo look like? Or this otherwise possibility that I'm so adamant is possible, how do we get there? And I'd first like to note that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I think sometimes it starts to feel like that, but there are ancestral ways of knowing and doing that existed long before our current ways of knowing and doing in a Western society, and those things just need to be reawakened. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is possible, this has been done before, and it still exists. But I don't know for sure exactly how we get to this future, but I do have some thoughts and some ideas and dreams that I can share. And so one of those things kind of comes down to the fact that I don't want to be a buffalo rancher like my dad, not just because I'd rather not like break a nail fixing fence or cruise around the ranger chasing bulls, because I can and I have done those things, but also because I don't want to see a world in which I want to see a world in which individualism has no place in buffalo restoration. So thinking about this is like, how can I get creative about what alternatives looks like to still be on my homelands around the buffalo and still have my family's range unit and live and grow up and grow a family on my homelands without being a individual buffalo private herd manager or rancher. What would it look like to cooperatively run a buffalo ranch with multiple families that aren't just in my household? Could that happen? Could multiple families have equal stakes in and offer what they can? People who don't have the opportunity and the access to own land or to get a range unit, how can they still become involved in buffalo restoration? How can they still have access points to the buffalo herd and be involved with them in the way that I've happened to be so blessed to have my whole life? I think we also think a lot, and this has been like a really hot topic recently, would be corridors as kind of portals to an otherwise. What they really can represent. I mean, the idea of Buffalo corridors is something that to me is really exciting because I think it shows something that's really possible within our current land use policy and frameworks and system that radically does kind of transcend how we currently approach our relationship to buffalo as livestock or as wildlife and how they move around. Like if imagine what it could represent if we could get two tribal governments to cooperate together enough to have to buy up farmland between Cheyenne River and Pine Ridge and our two buffalo herds merge. That is technically very possible. And what that would do for the bonding of our communities, the healing of our communities, the healing of the Ocheti Shakoi, the healing of the buffalo. Buffalo are meant to roam. And I think it's really important that we start taking down some of these barriers and these fences, not just literally, but also in the way we think about what is possible, what can we do for the buffalo, and what can they do for us. And as our aunties from Hawaii said yesterday, that we really don't need to rely on the government as we always make it seem like we have to in some of these programs and some of these funding opportunities. I know that the dependence runs deep in our communities and it comes from a really real place, and sometimes we can't move beyond that reality. And I know that we, like, our relationship to the U.S. of the state doesn't just disappear. Like, I'm not out of touch here, but I think there are ways to move away from this, and there are orgs and private funders who are really kind of setting precedent for wealth redistribution and mutual aid and community care that can push us in the right direction, and that is grounded a little bit more in our ways. And so I really don't know exactly what the journey to transition to these alternative systems looks like, and I don't know a timeline, and I don't have a clear game plan. And I promise you, I don't think it's an easy feat to get there, and I'm not delusional. I already know that will be the hardest thing I could probably possibly take on as a career path or a sense of purpose, and I'm keenly aware of that. But I also know that when I'm elbow deep in a buffalo carcass and it's December and I'm passing a knife to a younger youth than me with buffalo blood dried up in the corners of my mouth, and I see my little baby nephew toddling around at a buffalo butchering and almost tripping over the skull, I really don't care about what the federal government or anybody else has to say about how realistic some of these things are and these alternative systems are, because I can feel it and I can see it and I know it's realistic and I know it's possible. It's right in front of me in that buffalo, in my baby's nephew's laugh, and in the eyes of our elders who believe in our ways and who have been praying for our people. And we deserve it. We just have to mean it when we say that, and we have to remind each other. So I'm happy to remind you anytime you need it, and hopefully today I've been able to remind you that you deserve it too. And yeah, I look forward to spending the rest of my life dreaming and hoping and working really hard towards it for all of us. So with that, I say, wopila tanka ichichiapie, na ampetuashte yuhape. Thank you all, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Yeah. And I'm absolutely shocked that I left time for any questions, but please don't feel pressured to ask any. But you can. And you can also find me anytime. I talk about it. Any day is my favorite thing to talk about in the world. Food apartheid to replace food desert. Do you have alternative language for food sovereignty? I've tried to think long and hard about this because I talk about it all the time and I keep saying food sovereignty and I keep having to say that like maybe this isn't the best language. I've also heard the food apartheid thing, and I think that's really important, especially because deserts are not rid of food. There's tons of food in the desert. I think for me, what I've been thinking about with regards to alternative language for food sovereignty is because when I'm talking about food sovereignty, I'm primarily talking, at least in my community, about buffalo restoration, or that's my niche. And I've wondered what similarly that means. If I don't want to call buffalo restoration food sovereignty and buffalo restoration, those two words could never possibly encapsulate everything that I mean when I'm trying to talk about it. So why don't I ask the elders and the language speakers in my community, how would they say buffalo restoration in Lakxota? What would the words that they what are the words that they think of? I don't know if we have a word for restoration in this context in our language. Would they draw on words and terminology relating to health, to land, to kinship, all of the above? Would it be like 3 sentences long? Would it be one word? Would they summarize it as just wo Lakota, being Lakota, our way of life? Well, what would they say? And what insight comes from that? And so I think that part of it is moving away from, and I mean, I know there's value in using something like food sovereignty to be able to, as a catch-all and to bring us all in spaces like this together. And so I do think it would be meaningful to have a conversation with people on what we could say in English to do that. But I think what I'm focused on right now is trying to figure out how I would say that, how would I say buffalo restoration in Lakota as defined by my people in my community? And how would maybe somebody from whatever community you come from, how would you guys say food sovereignty in your language? And what does that look like? And what teachings come from that? Because I think there's so much. My dad told me very early on, as somebody who didn't grow up speaking the language, but who worked very closely with first language speakers and a lot of elders and spiritual advisors, that I would never fully understand what the buffalo mean, or my relationship to them, or what it means to be a Lakota person connected to the buffalo if I didn't know the language. And so that's something that really holds me accountable to learning the language. As I'm up here talking about buffalo and stuff, I feel like I really don't even know. Because even just my limited understanding of the language really teaches me so much more than I could have ever imagined if I didn't know any of the language or didn't grow up hearing it, or some of these concepts that I then learn in the language, I see reflected in the buffalo in the way that I got to grow up, and it makes sense to me, and it wouldn't have made sense otherwise. And so I think it's really important to consider the maybe sometimes the ways in which trying to have a catch-all phrase is inherently going to limit what we're talking about. You were so inspirational. Thank you. Thank you for sharing some of your teachings today. Is there a book you can recommend or resources to learn more about following the buffalo towards the future? I don't know about anything specific to buffalo that I've really read, but a book that has really inspired me in like the concepts that ground this, and kind of as like broader decolonial theory and scholarship and stuff, is another Anishinaabe woman, Leanne Simpson, and her book is called As We Have Always Done. That's a very, very good book, and I highly recommend it. And then that the artist, the other Anishinaabe woman I was talking about, she just came out with a new book, or is about to come out with a new book. I haven't read it yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm gonna love it. So I'd recommend those. I'm curious how you can involve more youth into the work you are doing so they're inspired to help bring a brighter future to their tribes. Funny you should ask. My fellowship project that I'm working on right now with First Nations Development Institute, as a part of that, I am organizing with another young lady, Cody Horse, who I've been so blessed to get to know through some Buffalo work and like really bond with over. We are hosting, and I can't invite the whole world. It's a very small event, so nobody come to me asking for an invitation. I'm so sorry, and it's already planned. But I will host, and we will host another one. But we're doing an all young women's buffalo butchering at my home to try to bring more young women into the fold, because it's been a very, I feel like, isolating, even if it's been a blessed experience to be in this position. I want as many people as I could possibly get in my lifetime to be able to have the types of experiences that I've had with the buffalo. It would mean the world to me if every one of you in this room got to know what I'm talking about. And so that's something I'm trying to do in the more immediate future, but my family tries to semi-regularly bring out youth groups to do buffalo harvests and stuff to try to fill the gap of some of the programming that we see locally that maybe isn't happening as much as we would like to see, or certainly isn't meeting the needs and the wants, hopes, and dreams of the community. And so trying to get more folks out and more opportunities, especially for young people. So yeah, that's something we try to do. Tell us your most radical dream. Oh, I wonder who wrote that. I want to talk to you. But I think something I've been thinking about a lot is how I think a lot of the time the most radical things are the simplest ones. And I think the most radical dream that I could imagine would be a world in which a relationship to the buffalo in our everyday of life was normal, and it wasn't special to have grown up around the buffalo beyond like a general sense of gratitude and like love for our people and our cultures and the land and the buffalo, but where somebody having the experiences as that I've had wasn't unique. It didn't make me interesting. It didn't give me a reason to be on a stage to talk and share with other people about it, but that it was normal. It was everyday life, again, as it should be, as it has always been, as we have always done. A little reference to the book. I think that's the most radical thing I could imagine, would be buffalo being a normal part of Lakota people's everyday life again. And I really hope that someday that can happen. And no more questions because there's 46 seconds. But thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time.